So I've been spying on the people of the internet for the better part of my adult life. I started over 20 years ago, back before the expression social media came into popular use, and it's been an interesting ride that I finally decided to try to share back a little bit. I've been very reticent about actually creating content and participating in the shenanigans of the online world. Called it an occupational hazard. There's a myriad reasons why I still am not sure that this is such a good idea, but I would like to ask for feedback on a couple of ideas and findings that I've had and ask for help in terms of how to interpret it, because it's quite mind-boggling to me and remains so after more than a decade and a half. I suppose the best time to have done this would have been 15, 16 years ago, but the next best time seems to be now. What I'd like to do is to walk you through a demonstration of why I believe there's empirical proof of collective human consciousness, that we are able to, as a global human society, operate at a level that is beyond the individual. I happen to arrive at this through data, through textual analysis of content, of utterances, of comments, of ideas and thoughts and emotions presented in the online space. Some would argue that this is merely an artifact of the fact that we all share a connection and in fact do operate as a collective organism, or it could be the result of the fact that the internet and social media platforms allow us to connect directly and instantly in ways that is at a scale that was never seen before in the course of humanity's history. Whatever the reason, my proposition is that the collective emotions expressed by people are very accurate in predicting human society level events and behavior, both on a short as well as a medium-term scale. I actually suspect it's a fractal. If I had enough resources and access to data, I would probably be able to drill down and scale up in terms of time. For now, what I have seen with my own eyes is that it is possible to foretell what the future might hold on a range between 6 to 8 days in the future, all the way out to 3-4 months in the future. Now, the fact that I have not been able to turn this into commercial success or monetization, or even to convince more than a handful of people that this might actually hold value over the last 17 years does give me pause, but I remain convinced, and hopefully I can at least show a few things that others might have missed. For me, it all started on the eve of the great financial crisis back in 2008. That late fall and early winter, as kind of the financial system and the world economy was on the brink of coming to a screeching halt, I was given a work assignment to use this newfangled wisdom of the crowds, internet thingamajig, social media content, user-generated content, consumer-generated media. Like I said, social media was not exactly a term that was in use at all at the time. The task was to try to measure objectively how much confidence and trust people have in the financial system and financial institutions. It was something I'd worked on for many weeks and months and failed spectacularly. The simple reason being that every time I tried to create a definition for and to search for and to interpret data talking about trust and confidence and positive sentiment about these things, I kept coming up with false negatives. People were expressing their disgust, their dismay, their lack of trust, their lack of confidence in all of the aforementioned things. And so I was about ready to give up because I'd been banging my head against the brick wall for quite some time when I had the idea that if I couldn't measure the height of the mountain directly, perhaps I can try to do so by looking at the length of the shadow and to derive the height from the shade that it cast. And so instead of trying to find positive expressions I turned to the exact opposite. And it turns out that fear, anxiety, negative emotions are much more basic, much more simple, much easier to detect, and much more accurate in terms of measurement. And soon enough, I was able to come up with a metric that essentially measured how much online conversation was about negative consequences. People being afraid for their jobs, their income, their ability to feed their kids. And in time, it turned into a metric that I believed was an accurate representation of, for lack of a better word, fear. When I wanted to validate this, because it's all nice and fine in theory, but how do we prove that it actually has any relevance? I happened upon the figures maintained by Bureau of Labor Statistics and the Fed. There's another U.S. government organization that eludes me at the moment. I'll look it up later. But the point is, how much money the consumer spends into the economy is something that's measured religiously. It's one of the driving forces of our wonderful consumer society, and what ended up turning out in the results is that people's conversations and expressions of fear preceded economic activity by 2 months. So depending on how much of the conversation was of a very extreme negative tone, I would be able to forecast how much 2 months hence would be spent by the U.S. consumer, and conversely, how much of their disposable income people would put aside in savings. This is a tracker that I maintained for about 18 months, maybe 22 months, until I lost access to the data source. It was on the order of 85 to 92% correlated with future economic activity. Even though I had access to conversations about banks and insurance companies and credit card companies and investment firms, large investment banks, it turned out that the only portion of it that was actually useful and predictive, surprise, surprise, was the amount of extreme negative economic outcomes associated with large investment banks like Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, JP Morgan, and the like. But as mentioned, I was never able to, I guess, convince people that this actually might have merit. The environment and my own personal circumstances prevented me from making use of this on my own. So after a couple of years, I just put it into the drawer and went on with my life. A few years later, as I was working for a very large, let's call it an information technology company, I was presented with a very specific case, which is how can we forecast the sales of high-end electronic devices. And at the time, the existing method was to use surveys, go out into, let's say, several dozen national markets, and in each create a sample of several hundred questionnaires and ask people how likely they are to buy product X or Y. And then these would be collated and collected and brought back and analyzed. And this whole thing probably employed at least 20 full-time employees and had a budget of several $1 million. And it was extremely poor in terms of its predictive capability. There was no better than a 50-50 chance that any particular forecast would be accurate. And so, once again, the newfangled mechanism of analyzing social media or online content was my job. And so I was asked to see if I could create a metric that was A, cheaper, B, faster, C, more accurate. Spoiler alert, yes, it is possible, although there are some caveats on where it works better and less so. But the end result was that I was able to create another data set that, using actually a totally different principle, was able to forecast with something between 70 to 85% accuracy the unit sales of high-end electronics 6 weeks out, 7 weeks out. Once again, it seems the universe didn't want me to, I guess, move forward in this path. The now accustomed pat on the back of having done a good job was given, but ultimately the multi-million-dollar survey budget was deemed more important, and so it continued, and once again the idea was put back in the drawer. Fast forward to 2020, 2021, I was in kind of desperate straits, both on a personal and professional level. I'd started my own company, but things were not going well enough, and I had a large family to support. But I noticed that the media environment, the amount of propaganda, the distortion, the amount of, let's say, questionable information that was being put out by all parties, sundry and different, mainly corporations and governments, but a lot of it was automated as well. Anyway, my point is that it seemed to me to resemble the state of affairs that had reigned during the 2008-2009 great financial collapse. And I said, what the heck do I have to lose? Let's pull this out of the drawer and see if I can do something with it. And so in late 2021, early 22, I set down to the task of trying to recreate my earlier model. Different mechanism, different input data, but similar principle. And so I was able to create a measurement, mainly using Twitter content, but also incorporating things like blogs and forum contributions and discussion boards and comments and articles, as well as the official mainstream media. And by measuring the amount of conversation that was of an extremely, severely negative tone and emotion, I was able to once again come up with what seemed to be a stable and reasonably representative metric. In trying to tie this to the real world, I came up with trying to see if the value of the dollar against the other erstwhile reserve currencies, the Japanese yen, the British pound, the Swiss franc, the euro, and so forth, was in fact reflective of the anxiety, the angst, the fear that economic participants had. And so if the value of the dollar goes up, generally it is, not always of course, but in many cases tied to turmoil, geopolitical strife, war. And 2022 was a good year to see if this idea could be put to the test. Once again, I was actually the one most amazed by how accurate it worked. So the collective utterances and the emotions of the hundreds of millions of people online, in fact, did with something like 85-90% accuracy forecast changes in the relative value of the dollar 6 weeks to 8 weeks in the future. Every time I tried to explain this, I was generally met with both derision and disbelief, perhaps with good reason, but I remained convinced. Nevertheless, it was not something that I was able to publish in any meaningful way. The last leg of the journey was when I said, okay, let's try to do something that people will pay attention to. And so I changed the mechanism a little bit and looked at a different time scale. I was able to gather more data. I, at the time, had access to the Twitter API, mostly the full pipe, not entirely, but that's beside the point. And the last metric that I was able to put together was a measurement of the relative change in the price of not only the dollar, but also the two most popular cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin and Ether. In this case, the measurement seemed to be most accurate 6 to 8 days out compared to present time. But as I mentioned, I think it is a fractal. And so the exact same pattern of 6 to 7 weeks out was also playing out. It's just that in the course of events, I was not able to gather more than about 1.5 years of data. And so that was not sufficient to create a timeline that's longer. But in my opinion, it should be possible to go out further, whether it's 6 months or 2 years. I honestly don't know yet, but this is where the feedback and assistance part comes in. If anybody has a professional subscription to the Twitter API, I'd be more than happy to share my methodology. If anyone is interested in recreating a metric and seeing if it can be adapted to other purposes. Over the years, I've become convinced that one of the reasons, if not the reason, that I failed to sort of move ahead with it was that I was desperately trying to turn this into a living. I wanted to create a revenue stream from it. But if any of what I just said is true and valid, this is actually a tool that I believe could be used in almost an infinite number of ways, and in ways that would benefit everyone as opposed to just a select few. I know that high frequency trading programs have been using methodology like this for, I don't know, decades now. It is well documented in the academic literature that for example, stock prices can be accurately forecast based on social media content, specifically Twitter, 2, 3, 4 days out. But as far as I've been able to tell, and I do need to restart my reading on this topic, but after that, the effect decays. And the general consensus that I was able to find is that it's totally not possible to do this at any range more than a few seconds, a few minutes, or a day or two out. But I believe otherwise. In closing, I did want to make sure that I gave a shout out to Cliff High. I had stumbled upon his work, the Altabot reports, and the concept of measuring and trying to forecast the future from online media content, from the utterances of the mass jabber of the hundreds of millions online. But at the time in 2007, 2008, I honestly didn't understand. I didn't understand the reports, I didn't understand the methodology, and in the end decided that it was kookishness and didn't, in fact, sort of believe that it could be done. And it's only a decade after that I realized that most of the work that I'd put in was all based on this concept and idea. And now that I've had a chance to go back and listen to more of his work, I would highly recommend that you all check it out as well. He can be found on Substack. And Cliff, if you ever see this, I hope you're well. Very sorry for your loss, and congratulations on how you've put everything back together. And I hope to continue to learn from you going forward. In any case, if any of this is interesting, please stay tuned for more. I appreciate you sticking with me to the end. Have a blessed day, and talk to you soon.